Dr. Herman Winick, born and educated in New York City, received his A.B. and his Ph.D. from Columbia University. Following a postdoc position at the University of Rochester, he continued work in high-energy physics and accelerator development at the Cambridge Electron Accelerator at Harvard University, serving as assistant director. He came to Stanford in 1973 to lead the technical design of the Stanford synchrotron radiation project and served as deputy director of the lab until his semi-retirement in 1998. He has taught physics at Columbia, Rochester, Harvard, MIT, Northwestern, University of Massachusetts, and Stanford. His 1970s and 1980s research developing periodic magnet systems, wigglers and undulators, had a major impact on synchrotron radiation sources and research facilities at Stanford and around the world. He is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the American Physical Society. He has more than 100 scientific publications. His scientific work has been recognized by awards from the U.S. Particle Accelerator School and the U.S. Department of Energy. His work in helping dissidents and protecting academic freedom and human rights has been recognized by the New York Academy of Science with the Pagels Prize in 2005 and the American Physical Society Sakharov Prize in 2010. So please welcome today's speaker, Dr. Herman Winick.
Is this on now? Yeah. Thank you, Debbie, for that lovely introduction. I'm glad you mentioned the award I got from the New York Academy of Science. When Stanford found out about that, they had a little article in the newsletter which says, remember, it's the New York Academy of Science, it said, Winick wins Academy Award. My kids were very impressed. Okay, I'm pleased to tell you today about a rather remarkable project that I was involved with starting with other people 20 years ago in the Middle East, using science to bring people together from different ethnicities, religions, political systems, etc., all of whom want the advantage that this advanced synchrotron light source, I'll tell you what that is later, can bring to them. It's an example of what we call science diplomacy, something we need more of these days. So let me, this is not working. Oops.
Yeah, it just did work.
Well, I wanted to say a few words about SLAC. I've been working for 45 years at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, now called the SLAC, National Accelerator Laboratory. It's just a few miles from here. You can see a picture of the 2-mile-long linear accelerator and the research yard that it feeds at the end, at the bottom there. Let's see how I work this. This is a layout of the linear accelerator and the research yard. And you see, I'm sorry, I can't, I think this, you can't see this, right? So you see the small circular rings on the right-hand center. Those are the, that's the circular accelerator, which we use to,
Get you a pointer.
okay, good idea. It's the circular accelerator which generates extremely intense X-rays. These X-rays, called synchrotron radiation, are 1 million to 1 billion times more intense than dental or medical X-ray tubes. And they've revolutionized many branches of science, and I'll tell you about some of them. Yeah, here's the Spear storage ring that I've been working on for 45 years. And also, you can see coming out here at the end, recently SLAC has gotten, I think, up to $2 billion from the Department of Energy to build the world's first X-ray laser. So this extension of the linear accelerator for several hundred meters generates extremely intense X-ray laser light, which is another factor of 1 million or so more bright than the storage rings, which are 1 million times more bright than dental or medical X-ray tubes. Dental X-ray tubes, for example, produce a lot of X-rays, but they're not very directional. They come out all over. You may notice that the technician who's doing it ducks behind a LED screen. They don't want to get exposed. A large part of the room is filled with X-rays. They put a lead apron on you so it doesn't go. And I caution people, when they put the apron on you, hike it up to cover your thyroid. It's a good idea to do that. Oops. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, I lost it. So this graph shows, we've all heard of Moore's law, which has resulted in 1 million or so times improvement in performance of integrated circuits. The brightness of X-rays has exceeded the rate of increase of brightness due to synchrotron radiation and now free electron lasers. I want to point out that someone sitting here invented the idea for the free electron laser and proposed to build it at SLAC. This is Claudio Pellegrini. Claudio, you want to stand up? So he's a humanist. And he is largely responsible for extending SLAC's lifetime by another 20, 30 years or so, because it's now got the brightest X-ray source in the world, in addition to the storage rings. So, based largely on work that we've done at Stanford for the past 45 years, using the circular facility, the sphere storage ring, similar projects have developed all over the world. There's more than 50 of these circular synchrotron light sources around the world. You see red dots all over Western Europe, Japan, China, Taiwan. There's one in Australia, one in Brazil, several in the US, one in Canada. Glaringly absent, there's none in Africa. Here's the SESAME project in the Middle East that I'll be talking about, but we're also working together with people in Africa to build a light source somewhere in Africa, a synchrotron light source. Why a synchrotron light source in the developing world? It allows scientists, students, to conduct world-class basic and applied research. It trains graduate students who no longer have to go abroad. Right now, bright students in countries that do not have such a light source, bright undergraduates who need to get a graduate degree, are sent to Europe, the US, Japan, or whatever. And if they're really good at research, they get jobs there and they don't come back. A facility like this locally will allow them to get their advanced training closer to home. Also, it attracts scientists working abroad, the diaspora from that area. Once they know that there's a bright research facility closer to home, they go back. X-rays can be used to address local, regional issues, concerns, biomedical, environmental, and human heritage. With X-rays, you can read ancient manuscripts that are hard to read or written over. You can study very old ceramics, learn the technology that went into the glazes, for example. You can study environmental pollution. And you can develop drugs that combat diseases that are particularly important to that area. Promotes the development of high-tech industry, and in the case of SESAME, using scientific cooperation to promote peace and understanding between people from different traditions, religions, races, and political systems. Light sources operate in a democratic mode, open to all, women, minorities, etc. Why is it called a light source? Well, you're familiar with the fact that white light, sunlight, can be dispersed by a prism into its many colors. The colors of visible light range from red to violet, and they're dispersed at different angles, and we have the spectrum. But you know that beyond red there's infrared and more. There's radio waves, radar, other things that go beyond the red that we don't see here because they don't make it through the crystal, through the prism. And beyond violet, blue and violet, there's ultraviolet. So you know there are colors of light that we can't see, but they're very important, and every part of the spectrum, well, this is how rainbows are made, of course, because the water droplets disperse the different colors. So visible light, this narrow slice here, is a piece of the electromagnetic spectrum, which extends very far to the left. It's a longer wavelength. We go from visible to infrared to microwaves to radio waves, etc. And beyond ultraviolet, beyond violet, we have ultraviolet, X-rays, and then gamma rays beyond that. So it's a continuous spectrum, and this part of the spectrum range from infrared to X-rays is the part that has been impacted by these synchrotron light sources, which are producing light in that part of the spectrum that's 1,000,000 times brighter than anything else. Oops. I don't know why it went back. Okay. The way the radiation is emitted is due to the acceleration of electrons. That's how radio waves are emitted, for example. Radio waves produce, the antenna in a radio station shakes electrons up and down in a radio antenna at radio frequencies and generates electromagnetic radiation, which we call radio waves. So any acceleration of a charged particle results in radiation, and circular motion is also accelerated motion. You know in a car, you know when you're starting, you're accelerating or braking in a linear fashion, you can feel it, but you also can feel it when you go around a corner, because circular motion is also accelerated motion. It turns out that when you push a light particle, light charged particle like an electron, to go in a curve with magnets, especially a high energy electron, that the radiation it emits is extremely intense and extends way beyond radio waves, television, through visible, which we're not interested in because lasers, visible light lasers, are very powerful. But when you get into the X-ray regime, they offer X-ray intensities that, as I said, are 1,000,000 times higher intensity than conventional sources. And that's shown here. If the electron energy is low compared to the speed of light, it comes out in all directions. But once you get to high energy, so-called relativistic electrons, this pattern folds forward due to relativity effects, and you get a very directional beam coming out from every curved part of the orbit. And even 20 or 40 meters away, the amount of X-rays you can put on a millimeter-sized object is, as I said several times, millions of times more intense. This says the same thing. It just gives the angle. You may remember that the Crab Nebula, still seen in the sky, is due to the supernova that burst in 1054 AD, studied by Chinese scientists. And we still see the beautiful whitish, bluish light around the Crab Nebula due to high-energy electrons orbiting in galactic magnetic fields. Once more, nature did it first. An important development in the early 1900s was the demonstration that X-rays can diffract off crystals or any regular object. So if you just take any X-ray tube, like a dental or medical X-ray tube, put a small opening in a screen and let it impinge on a crystal, you get lots of dots. It's called a diffraction pattern. From that diffraction pattern, you can determine what the structure is of each of the atoms or molecules in that crystal. This is a very powerful method to determine structure of molecules. Perhaps the most famous X-ray diffraction pattern was one of DNA, made by this wonderful scientist, Rosalind Franklin, 1952, before synchrotron sources were available. It probably took her days or weeks to get this pattern because the X-ray intensity was so low. Unfortunately, she died shortly after this, and people took that data and went on to win the Nobel Prize by showing that this pattern shows that DNA is a double helix, revolutionizing biology. So here's the double helix. Since then, many Nobel Prizes have been awarded due to X-ray work, all of these. In fact, the first Nobel Prize was to Wilhelm Röntgen, 1901. It was the first year that Nobel Prizes were awarded, and they gave the physics prize to Röntgen for discovering X-rays. More recently, X-ray diffraction has been used by these people in red here, including our colleague Roger Kornberg at Stanford, who determined the structure of RNA polymerase, a vital protein for manufacturing proteins, reading out the genetic code. Ribosome was structured by this group of people, including Adionath, who worked for so many years to determine the structure of ribosome. All those in red were using the intense radiation from synchrotron sources. So why are X-rays so important? They're a ubiquitous tool for basic and applied research, and they have revolutionized our ability to understand the properties, structure, and function of materials. They're now being used to develop new materials. It's one thing to take a material and determine what it is, but people now want to develop a material that has better electrical conductivity, magnetic properties, smaller size for integrated circuits, for example, and X-rays are useful for that. So people are developing new materials. And recently with X-ray lasers, such as the SLAC linear coherent light source, X-ray lasers have opened up the region of femtoseconds. We can make bursts of X-rays that are only a few femtoseconds long. A femtosecond is 1/billionth of a nanosecond, okay? Pretty small unit of time. And during that time, you can make a lot of X-rays. And you can literally make X-ray movies stroboscopically. And you can learn how chemical reactions and biological processes evolve. Proteins fold, for example. You can study them and make a movie of protein folding and chemical reactions. So now SESAME. SESAME stands for synchrotron light for experimental science and applications in the Middle East. I think it's an excellent acronym. I thought that should be the name of the project, and then we figured out what it stood for. Okay. If you look up Sesame, it's in Jordan. It's sesame.org.jo. If you leave out the JO is for Jordan, which is where it's located. If you leave out the JO, you'll get Sesame Street, which is not irrelevant because that's where young people are trained to cooperate and respect each other. And that's one of the objectives of this project, to bring scientists and everyone from these countries, Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Iran, etc. You can read it here. In the first meetings of the Sesame Council, made up of representatives of these 8 countries, they seated them alphabetically. So Israel and Iran sat next to each other. they got a little nervous about being photographed that close to each other. It doesn't play that well back home, so they are now separated around the table. We have many countries that are observers, that have a lot of experience with their own national synchrotron light sources, and they send observers, they send equipment and money and advisors, so it's attracted attention from all over the world, from UNESCO and from these observer countries that you see here. Here's a map of the Middle East showing the countries that are members, listed before. There's still a lot of countries that are not members yet, and we're working on that. I went to Saudi Arabia here. It would be very good if Saudi Arabia would join because many of the Gulf countries would follow their lead. Spoke to ministers of science and scientists in Saudi Arabia. They want to join. They're very eager to pursue science in Saudi Arabia with something that's so close, but the government says it cannot join a project that has Israel as a member. How sad is that? Somehow people in Iran and Jordan and the Palestinian Authority have overcome that because they want the advantages that this project gives them. This is where the project is located. It's quite close to the Jordan River, Dead Sea, Jerusalem, etc. So it's actually closer. It's of course close to many Jordanian universities, but it's also close to Palestinian West Bank universities in Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, Bethlehem. So they just have to, within an hour, they can be there. And many Israeli scientists can also be there quite quickly. So it's modeled on CERN. You know about the CERN laboratory, the premier accelerator laboratory in the world. And it was started in the late 1940s with two aims. Facility that would go beyond the means of individual members and foster cooperation between people that were recently in conflict in the Second World War. All of Western Europe, Germany, Italy, France, England, all cooperated to build this magnificent laboratory. It's the best accelerator physics laboratory in the world. Recently built a colliding beam storage ring, 27 kilometers, 18 miles in circumference. Discovered the Higgs particle that you may know, and now it's the center of high energy physics. So we do the same here. Basically, we've taken the statutes that created CERN, which was done by UNESCO. UNESCO called consultative meetings, inviting countries from Western Europe to send representatives, the result of which was formation of the CERN Council. UNESCO is the repository of the documents that these countries signed, but it's a standalone international activity, and we do the same with SESAME. I took retirement from Stanford in 1997 because I wanted to spend as much time as I could on this project in the Middle East. I didn't feel so good about taking a salary from Stanford, so they were happy to cut off my salary and let me do what I wanted to do. So here is the SESAME building. I'll tell you more about it as we go through this. There's the building in Alan, Jordan, about 45 minutes outside of Amman. Hold on, let me see. Whoops. I don't know how to go back with this thing. Okay. This is inside the SESAME building, is this circular storage ring made up of equipment, some of which was donated by Germany. The Injector is a German machine that was being replaced by another machine. You may remember in the 1960s, 50s, 60s, Germany was a divided country. Berlin was a divided city. And West Germany and Britain, the US, etc., had control over the West Berlin section. But East Berlin was part of Communist East Germany, And Berlin was surrounded by communist East Germany. It was very difficult to get people to go and live there. So the Bonn government supported opera and ballet and a synchrotron light source. Believe that? So they built one of the best synchrotron light sources in West Berlin in the early 1980s. It was very successful. It had hundreds of users that came from all over West Germany. And then the wall comes down in the late 1980s, and these many users, what happens in any scientific facility like SLAC or anywhere, is they get a gift from the government of money to build some advanced machine like a light source. They use it for 5 years, 10 years, maybe 15 or more, and then they want something better. There's new technology. So with the new technology, the German government rewarded the users of this machine called Bessie, Berlin synchrotron in West Berlin, with a bigger, better, more modern machine in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Whenever something like that happens, because technology in these areas is constantly evolving, the people who have the money to build these machines ask for advice and criticism from the worldwide community. So the German government, the people for Bessie 2 it was called. Bessie 1 was 1980s, Bessie 2 was 1990s, and they formed an advisory committee made up mostly of German scientists, and someone said, we really should have an international committee. So they asked me to join that committee. I made many trips to Berlin. It was a very exciting city in the 1990s. And toward the end of that, when the new machine was coming online, I naively asked the question, what are you going to do with the older machine, Bessie 1, in former West Berlin? Answer, we're going to call in a junkyard dealer and sell it for scrap. He was one of the best machines in the world, but the German government did not want to support the operation of two machines. They were giving this wonderful gift to the scientific community of a bigger, better machine. And they had to get rid of it. So I suggested, don't destroy it, don't sell it for junk, offer it as a gift to the Middle East. And German colleagues picked that up, and now it's operating in the Middle East. It's making use of some of the old machine, but it's using newer technology to build a bigger and better one. So, so here's what has been built in Alan, Jordan. This is the German gift, basically, this injector, worth about $6 or $7 million alone, but a completely new advanced storage ring has been built and is now running. Ideas about a synchrotron light source to promote cooperation in the Middle East go back many years. In the early 1990s or 1980s, it was suggested by Abdus Salam, a Nobel laureate in physics, to foster projects that cross divides. And many other groups in Israel, in Egypt, in the Palestinian Authority, in Jordan, were cooperating on small scientific projects using science to bring people together. But the real idea came when this machine, instead of being sold for junk, was sent to the Middle East to be the nucleus of this new project. So Abdus Salam's vision and a group from CERN that was promoting this, and I made the suggestion that it should go to the Middle East. I collaborated with my good friend Gus Foss, with whom I worked at Harvard for 14 years. He went back to Germany, and he and I started this project to try to get people interested in building this light source in the Middle East. We got Herwig Schopper, a former Director General of CERN, to become the president of the SESAME Council, made up of representatives of the 8 countries. 2000, the site was selected in Jordan. 5 other countries competed to the site. It's an international operation, and anyone can go there. But the host country obviously gets the most benefit because it's closest to students and scientists in that country. So parts began to be manufactured, and with the help of CERN, which has been extremely supportive. 5 million euro were given by the EU to CERN to work with SESAME staff in building the magnets that bend the electrons around. These are the critical components. And here's one such magnet unit. 16 of these make up the ring, and each one of them generates synchrotron light. So the culture of high technology accelerators, magnets, vacuum systems, radio frequency controls, etc., alignment, these magnets have to be aligned to a few microns in position and angle. So all that expertise is now developed in the Middle East, and here are some shots of people working on it. And lo and behold, January 11th, 2017, it worked. Electrons were injected, ran around the ring, and started making this light. So I was quite happy at the time. It took 20, the first suggestion was 97, 2017 it started to work. I'd like to point out it's got a lot of support from UNESCO, because when UNESCO was asked to support it, they asked for a presentation. People from the region came and gave the presentation, and they approved it immediately. They called it a quintessential UNESCO project, combining capacity building with vital peace building through science, and a model project for other regions. And the main other region that's now looking at SESAME as a model is Africa, the only habitable continent that doesn't have a synchrotron light source. So people from many countries in Africa are looking closely at SESAME, at CERN. I'm on a committee to help them, but they're doing it themselves. And I think, perhaps given the SESAME experience, it might take another 20 years before a light source in Africa. I have to look at my life expectancy to make sure that I can enjoy that. Scientists from the Middle East are sent to synchrotron light sources around the world. Here are, sitting with the director of the Taiwan synchrotron facility, are scientists from Iran and Pakistan, actually. I think the two women are from Pakistan, the guy is from Iran. Taiwan offered to host them for a year to come to Taiwan, where they have an advanced light source, and work with people there completely at the expense of the Taiwanese. And other laboratories have done the same. I got some money from the Department of Energy to bring scientists from the Middle East to US laboratories. We have 6 such laboratories in the US. And together with Professor Brenda Lasta at Ben Gurion University, who told me that she had these 3 bright Palestinian students, we brought them to Brookhaven National Laboratory for a couple of months in what was that? I don't see the date, but 8 years ago or so. And they spent an incredible summer there learning about synchrotron light. We've had many meetings. The user community has been growing. The machine just turned on in 2017, but here's a meeting of a few hundred users in 2004. At the 8th annual user meeting, the hero of all the attendees was Ada Yonath, the Israeli woman who shared the Nobel Prize for structuring ribosome. Ribosome is perhaps the most important protein in your body because it makes all the other proteins based on the genetic code read out by RNA. It gathers the chemicals that it needs and makes all these thousands of proteins that govern everything in our bodies. It's shown here here's the double helix of DNA. It's split open, and RNA polymerase latches onto one of these chains and reads out the genetic code protein by protein, sends it to the ribosome, which makes the protein. The most incredible thing. This is what's called the central dogma of life, really. And the two critical proteins that govern this process are RNA polymerase, which was structured by Roger Kornberg at Stanford, for which he got the Nobel Prize, and ribosome, perhaps the largest, floppiest, most tender protein in our bodies, and that was structured by several people, primarily Ada Yonath from the Weizmann, a remarkable woman who worked partly at Stanford, who came here in 2009. I met her and admired her immensely. She worked alone for many years because other people thought that ribosome would never be structured with X-rays because it was too large, too tender. And she said, it's too important to give up on it. Let's keep trying. And she worked by herself with a small group. She went to Germany to use synchrotron light, and after 10 years of working alone, she began to get a hint that she could make a crystal. In order to get the structure of any protein, like ribosome, you need to make a crystal of it. It could be a millimeter-sized crystal, or even smaller. Shine X-rays on the crystal, the diffraction pattern can be used to interpret what the structure of that protein was, just like Rosalind Franklin did with DNA in the 1950s. So I'm driving in my car one day and listening to the radio. It says, Nobel Prize in Chemistry given to Ada Yonath and two others. I said, my God, my friend, she's got a Nobel Prize. I run home and send her an email. And then I realize she's getting 1,000 emails a minute and she's never going to see mine. So a couple of days go by, I don't hear from her. On a Friday night here, Saturday morning in Israel, I call her up. We had collaborated when she was here and we stayed in touch. And I didn't think she'd answer the phone. I'd get a message or maybe no answer. But she answers the phone. I recognize her voice. And I didn't think of what I would say. I stammered and says, I'm sorry to bother you. Probably so many people are bothering you with calls and everything, and I apologize for disturbing your Sabbath. This is early Saturday morning in Israel. And I'll never forget what she says. She says, Herman, you're right. Many people are bothering me. They're calling and bothering me from every direction. But you're the first one to apologize. This is Roger Kornberg, who used synchrotron radiation to determine the structure of this other important protein, RNA polymerase, shown here. It's amazing, these ribbons made up of thousands of atoms. We can know where each atom is and make these beautiful drawings. Many groups have visited SESAME. If any of you are in Jordan or close, let me know. I might be able to arrange for you to visit. We've attracted an advisory committee composed of experts around the world. That's me over here, you might recognize, but these are all people with experience with synchrotron radiation in their home countries. And a very interesting thing also is that electricity is very expensive in Jordan. It costs $375 per megawatt hour. That's 37.5 cents per kilowatt hour. That's like 5 or 10 times more than we pay here. So this would be very expensive because the machine uses a few megawatts when it's running fully. So a solar power plant is being built now with money from the EU to Jordan, and this is now under construction, and SESAME will be the world's first accelerator power entirely by renewable energy. An example for places like SLAC, which consumes tens of megawatts of electrical energy to develop X-ray lasers and synchrotron radiation. Labs like CERN consume even more. So this will be an example for the many accelerator labs around the world to stop making greenhouse gases. So it's running, it's starting to do science. There are ongoing challenges. But it's a working example of Arab, Israeli, Iranian, Turkish, Pakistani collaboration. Scientists from the region are working together Young and senior scientists from the region are collaborating. It's happening. It's incredible. Here's an example of a scientific collaboration. Science is really international. As I'll show you later, there's no such thing really as national science. But here's a piece of science done. This is a very complicated title. Forget about that. Just look at where they're from. Rehovot, Israel. Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cairo University. England. People from all these places are collaborating. And that's just one example of many. Although we have a machine that's operating, we still need more. If any of you know of sources of funds, we need to build a guest house, a conference room, a cafeteria. We have a small guest house to begin with, but we need a bigger one. So, construction of SESAME has been a victory of optimism. We've had many setbacks. People from the region signed up for it, but they didn't really understand the culture that, for example, CERN works on. It's international. Each country has to make their contributions, and they all have higher priority things, even though they've joined the project. So they're supposed to pay their share of the operating budget January 1st of each year. Come October, and some of them have not paid. There's not enough money to pay salaries. We take a loan out from the Jordan government and repay it when the money comes in. So an enormous amount has been achieved. It's working politically and technically. The training program has really built capacity in the region. And there have been voluntary contributions. Iran, Jordan, Turkey, and Israel have each agreed to contribute $5 million over and above their share of the operating. And that $20 million has been vital in buying the components a few years ago that led us to be able to complete the machine. The interesting thing is that Israel, Turkey, and Jordan have each given their $5 million that they promised. Iran promised to do it. Turns out there's no way for Iran to transfer money. The sanctions have locked them out of the banking system. They say they have the money, they'll do it. The sanctions have been released, and I'm wondering when they're going to send the money. But they'll do it, but it's an unintended consequence of the sanctions. So I think you can agree that we're talking about another world. The Israeli representative, Eliezer Rabinovich II, is on the council. He's a string theorist. He doesn't use synchrotron radiation. And he says, as a string theorist, I work on parallel universes. I was always curious about what a parallel universe is like, and now I know. I'm living in one when I go to SESAME meetings. So SESAME is happening. I like this last quote from Anton Chekhov, who said, there is no national science, just as there is no national multiplication table. Science that is national is not science. Thank you. I even finished in time. Yes.
You have to wait for Mike.
Who has a question?
Here.
Okay. Well, I have a question about the operation of this. Your source that you're accelerating are electrons.
Right.
Now, they cover the entire spectrum?
The radiation they emit covers the entire
So
spectrum.
you have to filter those out. Now,
Yes.
are they filtered out as they go around?
No, they give off this intense radiation in very directional beams all around the ring. And you use crystals and gratings and slits and mirrors to select the part of the spectrum that's interesting for your experiment. You throw away 99.99% in every beam line, and you want to study, for example, a protein like hemoglobin. You're interested in where is the iron in hemoglobin? You tune into what's called the iron K absorption edge. You make radiation that's specifically sensitive, that iron is specifically sensitive to. You throw away all the rest. Literally 99.99% you throw away in each beam line to pick, and there's so much left that you can do these experiments much faster.
Well, you have to filter out the X-ray
Right.
wavelength, the specific one that you want.
Exactly.
And you can pin that down
Yes. Yes.
to a little bit.
Yep. To
And so
1 part in 1,000 or 1 part in 10,000 even.
And so you're exposing this, say, to some biological material.
Right.
Doesn't that even destroy the material?
Yes, it does.
It does.
So you want to filter out, only take a narrow part before you strike the biological. You let the biological sample see only the radiation that you want. You don't let 99.99% hit that biological
Well,
sample.
can you filter this out with the linear accelerator? Or what's the advantage of the linear over the circular one?
The advantage is you can make a laser with a linear accelerator. Claudio Pellegrini can tell you more about that. It was his idea, and we started that in 1992 when he showed at a workshop that we organized about new ideas for synchrotron light sources that a linear accelerator can do this. Now there are 3 or 4 such X-ray lasers around the world. We were the first ones because we had a linear. We have the world's longest linear accelerator at Stanford, okay? It's 3 kilometers long, made up 3 1-kilometer sections. We changed just 1 kilometer. We got $500 million from the Department of Energy, modified the last kilometer to drive this X-ray laser, which makes even narrower band radiation and coherent radiation. Anyway,
You get paid for having fun with this?
yes.
Any other questions?
They stopped paying me, by the way, but I'm still having fun.
Here, hold on. Here, I'll give you.
Great talk. I enjoyed it a lot. What energy range does this synchrotron work?
It works over the entire electromagnetic spectrum pretty much, but the most interesting parts are the ones, the wavelengths that are of greatest use for science and technology, from the infrared through the visible. In the visible, it's not competitive with lasers. Lasers are the brightest light source in the visible part of the spectrum, and the near ultraviolet and some of the But when you go away from the visible and away from the near infrared and the near ultraviolet into the X-ray range, they are by far the brightest sources in the world.
What kind of detectors do they use?
Well, initially they used film. As you know, film is sensitive to X-rays. Now we use electronic detectors. So.
Another thing is, like, when I was at Yale, and all these universities do have decommission all this, and I remember they were decommissioning an IBM computer, and I wanted to get it to Bangladesh at that time, and I couldn't go get it because the cost was exorbitant to ship it. Slovakia got it.
I see, okay.
So yeah, it's very important when U.S. get rid of their very expensive and valuable stuff.
Well, we've done that. We've sent a few pieces of equipment from Stanford, from Berkeley, to Jordan. But in fact, the pieces of equipment that we are willing to let go are not the most advanced, more modern. So it's best to do the best you can with new equipment.
Any other questions?
Could any of this radiation be weaponized? Is that why some countries might be interested in contributing?
To my knowledge, no. I mean, there are 50 or 60 of these light sources around the world. None of them do weapons. Well, there are people at weapons labs. We have a lot of scientists from Lawrence Livermore and Los Alamos that come to SLAC to do their work. They're interested in understanding the properties of materials relating to their weapons program. We have no secret, we have no guards or gates, it's all open. They are obliged to publish their research. They can delay publication for a while, but Stanford will not let classified work be done. And this is basically true everywhere. Fortunately, there's not many applications. And the fact if they wanted to develop a material that has certain properties relevant to the bomb program, the weapons programs of these, it's also materials that could be used in other places. And if they develop materials with new properties, it helps everybody.
Arthur Jackson here. question on this issue relative to there is no national science. Would you say that the reason the Germans didn't create an atom bomb before anybody else is because they had German science and as opposed to Jewish science, which they equated with Einstein?
That's very controversial as to why. In fact, we started the atomic bomb program here in fear of what the Germans would do. They had Werner Heisenberg, who was in Germany throughout the Nazi regime, arguably the most eminent physicist in the world at the time. And it's still a puzzle. I mean, Claudia, do you know why didn't Germany develop an atomic bomb?
This is a complicated question, and people are giving many answers. Well, one way to look at it is that it was the effort to build the atomic bomb in Germany was organized in a German way, very authoritarian. Werner Heisenberg was the chief, was the head of the project, and whatever he said was done. And on the other side, the effort to build the first nuclear reactor in this country was led by Enrico Fermi. And they were two very different persons. Werner was really a theoretical physicist. And on the other side, Fermi was also an experimentalist, and he followed every part of the project. So one important element that took place in this process was the purity of the carbon that they used to slow down the neutrons. And Fermi realized that what they had was not good enough, and he pushed to improve that part, and he was able to start a chain reaction. On the other side, they never solved that problem. And that might be due to different personality. Fermi was in the lab. He was cutting these carbon tablets used for the reactor.
The carbon rods.
Yeah. And he knew every detail of that from an experimental point of view. He realized how important was the purity of that element. On the other side, it was mostly theoretical, and they didn't realize that, and they hit a wall, essentially. Now, this is one description of the problem.
Well, you know what effort we put into the Manhattan Project. People from so many laboratories and huge amounts of money went into developing the bomb with parallel paths to enrich uranium, for example, at Berkeley with cyclotrons, Oak Ridge with gaseous diffusion, etc. And for some reason, the Germans did not have the wherewithal to mount that kind of effort. Anyway, Claudio was a scholar of science history, so I knew he would. And Fermi is, of course, the hero of Fermi, and so many people fled Nazi Germany and Europe at the time, and this country benefited from them, putting them to work.
Yeah, my question here is, well, not only is there amazing science behind all this, but the biggest miracle seems to me to be the politics involved. Getting Arabs, Jews, and others to sit in the same room. Were you personally involved in any of that politic end of this?
Not really. We benefited greatly by having these meetings run by the president of the SESAME Council. And the presidents of the SESAME Council have all been former directors of the CERN laboratory, very experienced with international cooperation, particularly with countries that were at war with each other in the Second World War. So occasionally it erupts at a council meeting or other meetings where people want Sesame to take a stand on the Israeli Gaza thing, for example. And the ground rules are, these are out of bounds. We focus only on science. What goes on in the coffee breaks and other times is another matter.
Yes, in the late 50s, I had a friend that was one of the technicians of the synchrotron at Caltech.
Yes.
And I got to visit, so I know early on what a synchrotron was. And incidentally, unfortunately, both the director in the 80s, early 80s, and my friend died of lymphoma.
Oh, yeah.
So they didn't do health physics at that time.
Yep. Well, radiation is not good for you.
Right.
And X-rays are very damaging. When I was a kid, a dentist used to hold the film in my mouth when he took an X-ray. Did it for everybody. I don't know how many times a day. I think they got cancer of the hand or something. But now, as you know, you get a lead apron and technician ducks behind a lead screen, and people are much more aware of the dangers of radiation.
Hi, since Rosalind Franklin was really the first one
Yes.
who found the DNA structure, can Nobel Prize be awarded posthumously?
I think not. It has been awarded, I think, once, but they changed the rules. It can't be awarded posthumously. It's really very sad that this wonderful woman, who the hard part of determining the double helix is making a crystal of DNA, making a crystal of ribosome, making a crystal of RNA polymerase, making a crystal of hemoglobin. Some proteins crystallize well, many do not. In fact, that's why you need more intense sources, because if you can make a few millimeter sized crystal, Rosalind Franklin did it with a conventional X-ray, like a dental X-ray machine.
She did identify the structure and gave it to...
No, she didn't. She got the diffraction pattern before.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, before she could analyze it, others got it from her. By the way, they stole it literally, I think. If you read the double helix by Watson, Crick, and Wilkins, they shared the Nobel Prize based on her work.
Did Rosalind Franklin die of radiation poisoning?
You know, I don't know. I think she died of cancer. I'm not sure. Perhaps someone else knows. There's a wonderful book called Rosalind Franklin and DNA that I'm sure has the answer to that.
Any other questions?
How about setting up a tour?
Okay, you want to come to SLAC? I'll take you. Okay. SLAC is open to public tours. Okay, well, just go on the website. You can sign up. I'll meet you there. But they have an official tour system. Go to slac.stanford.edu. Look for public tours. There's also public lectures